I was sitting in the third pew on the left, the very seat I had occupied for nearly 40 years. Sunday morning church carried a particular scent, the smell of old wood, half-burned candles, and something that felt like time itself had settled there. At 63, I had grown accustomed to repetition, the same service hour, the same hymns, the exact quiet moment when everyone bowed their heads in prayer. Only one thing was different. The seat beside me had been empty for a year. My husband passed away exactly 1 year ago. A heart attack, so sudden that no one had time to say goodbye. He died in his home office, the place he used to joke that he lived in more than the bedroom. I still keep the habit of wearing the gray wool coat he liked. I still carry his old Bible in my handbag, even though there's no one left to remind me to mark my page. At this age, people tend to cry less frequently. Grief isn't loud. It simply sits there, quietly like an empty chair you learn to step past each day. As the final hymn began, the phone in my hand vibrated softly. I had forgotten to silence it. A small habit of old age I still hadn't managed to fix, no matter how often my children reminded me. The name on the screen made my heart tighten. Evan, the repair crew. I didn't answer right away. The renovation team had only started working on my husband's old office a few days earlier. It had taken me nearly a year to gather the courage to touch that room, not to erase him from my life, but to turn the space into a small library for the grandchildren, something he had talked about, but never had the chance to do. The phone vibrated again, this time stronger, more insistent. When the hymn ended, I excused myself and slowly walked down the stone steps in front of the church. The late September air was cool enough to make me pull my coat tighter around myself. "Ma'am." Evan's voice came through as soon as I put the phone to my ear. It wasn't the easygoing voice of a man who usually laughed and joked. It was lower, tighter. "What is it, dear?" I asked. There was a brief silence, long enough for me to hear the wind moving through the trees in the churchyard. Could you come home right away?" Evan said slowly, as if choosing each word with care. "We found something in your husband's office." My heart began to race. "What did you find?" I asked, my hand unconsciously gripping the strap of my bag. Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't think this is something you should come see alone," Evan continued, his voice nearly a whisper. "Please, bring both of your sons with you." I stood motionless on the church steps, looking up at the bell tower as it began to ring. The sound was so familiar that it should have made me feel calm. But somehow, in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Something had been waiting behind the door of my house. And the quiet life I had worked so hard to preserve for the past year was about to come to an end. If you've lived long enough to understand that some secrets only surface when everything seems settled, then perhaps this story is for you. Stay with us. Subscribe to the channel and continue listening, not just to a story, but to the experiences of an entire lifetime. I called my 2 sons as soon as I left the church grounds. My eldest son, Aaron, answered after a few rings. His voice was still groggy. The whole family was probably getting ready for Sunday breakfast. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. "I need you to come home right away," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And call your brother, too." There was a brief pause. Aaron didn't ask any questions. He simply replied, "All right, Mom, we're on our way." The call with my younger son, Daniel, was even shorter. He just said, "I'll be there." His voice was always like that, a few words, but I knew he was always listening. I drove home alone. The familiar road passed by houses I had seen for 37 years. Everything looked as peaceful as ever. Inside me, it was not. When I turned into the driveway, both of my sons' cars were already there. Aaron stood near the porch, neatly dressed, phone in hand. Daniel leaned against a wooden post, his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. The 2 of them stood close, yet didn't speak to each other. The sight made my chest ache. Since their father's death, the distance between them had become more noticeable. Not loud arguments, just long silences. Aaron believed things should be handled quickly and logically. Daniel was the opposite. He kept his feelings inside, and that hurt him. "Mom," Aaron said when he saw me, "what's going on?" "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. The front door opened before I could reach for my keys. Evan stood there. His face was tense, entirely unlike the relaxed expression he'd worn days before. "Thank you for coming," he said, then looked at my sons, and "Thank you both for being here." "What did you find?" Aaron asked bluntly, stepping inside ahead of me. We walked down the familiar hallway. The house felt different during renovation. The carpet had been rolled up. The paintings were taken down. The smell of fresh wood mixed with construction dust. My husband's office was at the end of the hall. I hadn't stepped into that room since the day he died. I had only stood at the doorway, looked inside, and turned away. Today, I had no choice but to enter. The room looked barer than I expected. The bookshelves had been removed, the wallpaper stripped away, revealing the rough wall beneath. His desk had been pushed aside, and the wall behind the desk was gone. Not a hole cut into it. Completely gone. In its place was a small, square space, large enough for several people to stand inside, a room I had never known existed in my own home. "This was a false wall," Evan said quietly. "2 layers. There was a hidden opening mechanism behind the bookshelf." Daniel slowed his steps, as if afraid to disturb the air. Itself. Aaron walked straight in. Inside the room, low wooden shelves lined the walls. On them sat neatly arranged file boxes. No dust, no mess, as if someone had been tending to them regularly. I looked at the labels on the files. The handwriting was so familiar, my heart clenched. My husband's handwriting. "Dad hid all this here?" Daniel murmured, almost to himself. Aaron picked up a file and opened it. I watched the color drain from his face. "These aren't regular work documents," he said. "There are photos, personal notes." I reached for another folder. Inside were printed pages, a few covertly taken photographs, and a name I recognized instantly. Someone we knew, someone who had once eaten dinner at our table. I had to grab the shelf to keep from falling. "That can't be right," I whispered. "There must be a mistake." No one answered. Daniel looked at me, worry filling his eyes. Aaron scanned the room, as if trying to piece together fragments of a story he didn't want to believe. And in that moment, I realized something more frightening than the existence of this hidden room. There was too much here, and it was arranged far too carefully to be a mistake. We stood motionless in that small room for a long time. No one spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of a power drill from a neighboring house and the sound of our own breathing. I had never imagined that in this house, where I had lived for nearly 40 years, there could be a place I had never once set foot in. Evan stepped back, giving my family space. He and the other workers stayed close to the doorway, as if they themselves didn't want to remain in the room for long. I walked in slowly. The floor was cold beneath my feet. The filing shelves were solidly built, chest high. Everything was neatly arranged by category, labeled and dated. Nothing about it felt rushed or improvised. "When did Dad start doing this?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling slightly. No one could answer. Aaron opened another file. This time he read more carefully. I saw his shoulders tense, his jaw tighten. "There are records," he said. "Long-term monitoring, not just once or twice." I picked up a smaller box and opened it. Inside were faded printed photographs taken from a distance. One showed someone walking out of a familiar restaurant. Another showed someone standing on a front porch. Ordinary scenes, disturbingly ordinary. I recognized 2 faces. One belonged to someone who had shaken my husband's hand at a town fundraiser. The other was someone I greeted every Sunday morning. I set the box back on the shelf. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold them. "This can't be," I said. "Your father wasn't that kind of person." Aaron didn't look at me. He stared at the familiar handwriting, as if looking long enough might somehow change its meaning. I don't know what kind of person Dad was anymore, he said. His voice wasn't raised or sharp, but I heard something breaking inside it. Daniel stood in the corner, gripping the strap of his backpack. He looked from shelf to shelf, from name to name. His expression wasn't fear of the truth. It was fear for me. "Mom," he said, "you should sit down." I shook my head. I didn't want to sit. I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't be able to stand again. "Does anyone else know about this room?" I asked Evan, forcing my voice to stay steady. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. At least not from what we can tell. But there is something." He hesitated. I noticed fresh scratch marks on the front door lock, and yesterday the alarm system didn't activate the way it normally does. My heart sank. "So, someone's been inside the house?" Daniel asked. "We can't be sure," Evan replied, "but there are signs that someone may have tried." Aaron turned to look at me for the first time since entering the room. The anger was gone from his eyes. Only concern remained. "Mom, this isn't just a family matter anymore." I knew he was right, but I also knew that once certain things are spoken aloud, nothing ever returns to the way it was. I looked around the room again. These files hadn't been created carelessly. They were too methodical, too deliberate, as if someone truly believed they were doing what had to be done. That thought frightened me more than the possibility that my husband had done something wrong. Because if he believed this was the only way, then how long had he lived in fear? "Let's close the room for now," I said. "Today is enough." Evan nodded immediately, as if he had been waiting for me to say it. When the temporary wall was covered again with wooden boards, the room disappeared from view, but the feeling of it did not. That evening, after my sons had left, I walked through the house. Everything was where it always had been. Our wedding photo is on the cabinet. The wall clock is ticking steadily, yet I found myself looking at everything in a different light. I checked the door locks one more time, then again. As I passed through the hallway, I stopped in front of the office door. It was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it that way. A faint smell drifted through the air. Cigarette smoke. No one in my family smokes. I stood there for a long time, not daring to step inside and not daring to walk away. For the first time in a year, I didn't just miss my husband. I was afraid of him. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the secret room, but because I began to look back on my marriage through a different lens. Small details, once ignored, now came back with unsettling clarity. My husband Henry had always been careful. He disliked surprises. He didn't like changes to plans. He wrote everything down, from bills to the smallest appointments. I had always thought it was just the habit of a seasoned lawyer. Now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, Aaron and Daniel returned. Aaron arrived earlier than usual, carrying his laptop and several folders, looking as though he was preparing for a meeting rather than visiting his mother. "Mom," he said after sitting down at the kitchen table, "I think we need to talk clearly about what we found yesterday." Daniel sat across from me, silent, his eyes never leaving my face. "What do you think those files are?" I asked Aaron. He exhaled slowly, heavily. "They're not standard professional documents. Some of that information is personal. No lawyer is allowed to keep records like that without a very specific reason." "You mean your father broke the law?" Aaron didn't answer right away. He looked at me, choosing his words carefully. "I think Dad did what he believed was necessary," he said, "but that doesn't mean it was right." Daniel spoke for the first time. "You always see everything through the law," Aaron turned to him, "and you always see everything through emotion." I placed my hand flat on the table. "Enough." Both of them fell silent. "I don't want you turning this into an argument about right and wrong," I said. "Your father isn't here to explain himself, and I'm not ready to decide who he was." Daniel lowered his head. "I just don't want Mom to have to go through any more of this." His words tightened my chest. I realized that in that room, there weren't only my husband's secrets. there was also my son's fear. Around noon, when Aaron stepped outside to take a call, Daniel and I stood in the hallway near the office. "Do you remember when Dad stayed up for nights in a row about 10 years ago?" Daniel asked. I remembered, very clearly. Henry had said he was handling a complicated case. He'd lost weight, spoke less, and always locked his office door carefully. "That night, I overheard Dad on the phone," Daniel continued. "He said, 'If I don't do this, she won't be safe.'" I turned to him. "She?" Daniel nodded. I don't know who he meant, but he sounded certain. My heart began to race. I had been in the house, very close, yet I had never heard those words. "Maybe he was talking about a client," I said, even though I didn't fully believe it myself. Daniel didn't argue. He only said, "I think Dad was afraid, really afraid." That afternoon, Aaron returned looking more tense than before. "Mom," he said, "I checked the alarm system. It was manually disabled once 3 days ago." 3 days ago, I had been home. I hadn't touched the system. "That means someone else knows the code," Aaron said, "or used to." The room grew heavy. I could finally see what I had been trying to avoid. My husband wasn't the only one who knew about that room. That evening, after my sons had gone home, I sat alone in the living room. I opened the small drawer where I kept essential things. Inside were a few old letters, a watch Henry used to wear, and the small notebook he always carried in his coat pocket. I had never opened it. The first page contained only a single handwritten line. "If one day you read this, it means I didn't do well enough." I closed the notebook. My heart trembled. Henry hadn't written for the future. He had written as if preparing for the day, but everything fell apart. I looked around the familiar room. These walls had witnessed my entire life. Family dinners, small arguments, quiet nights. And now I understood that all those years, my husband had been carrying a burden I had never even been aware of. What frightened me wasn't that he might have done something wrong. It was that he had done all of it for a reason. And if that reason involved me, then I needed to know, because I couldn't continue living a life built on things I didn't understand. The next morning, I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the familiar chime I associated with neighbors. This one was firmer, shorter. I glanced at the clock. Just past 8. When I opened the door, 2 men were standing on the porch. They were neatly dressed, not overly stiff, but formal enough to make it clear they weren't there for a social visit. "Are you Margaret Lawson?" the man on the left asked, his tone polite. "Yes," I replied. "We're from a federal agency. We'd like a few minutes to talk about your husband's asset records." I invited them in. Aaron had told me to call him immediately if anything unusual happened. Still, I didn't want to make a scene before I understood what was going on. They sat at the dining table without removing their coats. One of them opened a notebook and began taking notes quickly. "Your husband had a long-term associate," he said. "Recently, we've been unable to reach him. We're reviewing some older documents." I nodded. He mentioned that person to me, but after my husband passed, I didn't stay in contact. The other man looked at me, his gaze probing but not unkind. "During the renovation, did you come across anything unusual?" I was silent for a few seconds. Then I told the truth, but not the whole truth. "Just some old paperwork. I haven't looked through it carefully yet." They didn't press further. They left a business card and instructed me to contact them if I remembered anything. When the door closed, I leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. The house suddenly felt smaller than it had in a long time. That afternoon, Aaron came back. I handed him the business card. He glanced at it and his face tightened. "Mom," he said, "this isn't simple anymore." "When was it ever simple?" I asked. Aaron didn't answer. He opened his laptop and quickly checked something. "Dad's associate withdrew a large sum from the company account and then disappeared," he said. "The timing of the renovation, it's not a coincidence." Daniel arrived later, carrying a bag of food, as he always did. But after hearing what had happened, He didn't say anything. He just set the bag on the table and sat down quietly. That evening, while I was washing dishes, my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. Stop. Some things shouldn't be dug up. No greeting. No signature. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, I deleted the message, though my hands were still shaking. Is everything okay, Mom? Daniel asked from the living room. No, I said, just spam. I didn't want my sons to worry any more than they already were. But about 10 minutes later, a sharp crash echoed from the living room. Glass shattering. Mom! Aaron shouted. A brick lay on the floor wrapped in a crumpled piece of paper. Before I could react, Aaron pulled me back while Daniel stepped in front of me. Aaron picked up the paper. There was only one handwritten line. Next time, it won't just be glass. No one spoke for several seconds. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Daniel broke the silence. We can't stay here. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. I looked around the house I had lived in for nearly my entire adult life. The familiar walls no longer felt safe. Aaron called the federal agency. This time, they arrived very quickly. They checked around the house, asked a few questions, then suggested that my sons and I leave temporarily. Just until things are clearer, one of them said. We don't want you in danger. Danger. The word felt strange when applied to my life. I had never thought of it before. As we sat in the car, leaving the familiar street behind, I looked back at the house one last time. The office lights were still off. That hidden room was still there, behind the temporary wall. And suddenly, I understood something. My husband hadn't hidden those things only because of the past. He had hidden them because he knew one day they would be found. And that day had come. We were taken to a temporary house about a minute's drive from town. There was nothing remarkable about it. A single-story home, simple furnishings, guards stationed outside. They called it for safety. I called it a place of refuge. That first night, I barely slept. Not out of fear, but because my mind refused to rest. I kept thinking about the files, the names, and the question I had avoided from the very beginning. Why? Why did my husband have to do all of that? The next morning, while Aaron was speaking with someone from the investigation, a middle-aged man was allowed to see me alone. He introduced himself as our former family doctor, the man who had overseen my health for more than 20 years. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice familiar. I nodded, but uneasily. He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing something carefully. "Henry once told me that if there ever came a day when things went beyond control, I was to tell you," he said. I clenched my hands. "Tell me what?" He exhaled slowly, heavily. "About you." The room fell silent. I could hear the wall clock ticking. "You weren't born with the name Margaret Lawson," he continued, his voice dropping. "That identity was created later." I looked at him, confused, but my heart began to race. "You were born with a different name, and you survived an incident that very few people live to talk about." I shook my head. "You're mistaken. I remember my childhood. I remember my parents." "You remember what you were told," he replied. Not all of it was true. He placed a thin stack of papers on the table. I didn't want to open it, but my hands moved of their own accord. A birth certificate, not for Margaret Lawson, a different name. The exact date of birth is mine, a city I had never associated with myself. "You were adopted after a fire," he said. "Your entire original family, no one survived, except you." I heard Daniel calling my name from the hallway, but I didn't answer. My ears were ringing. "Henry knew about this very early on," the doctor continued. "Just before the two of you married, he discovered inconsistencies in your records and went looking for answers." I closed my eyes. Faint images flickered through my mind, the smell of smoke, screaming, the sensation of running through darkness, things I had always believed were nightmares. "And when he uncovered the truth," the doctor said, He understood that if anyone ever dug too deeply into your past, you wouldn't be safe. I opened my eyes. Not safe from what? He didn't answer immediately. The people connected to that incident are still alive. Some of them are very powerful. I let out a dry laugh. So my husband decided to turn himself into the keeper of everyone's secrets in town? He believed that if he held enough information, the doctor said, no one would dare touch you. That didn't make me feel protected. It made me feel suffocated. He didn't ask me, I said. He didn't give me a choice. He was afraid, the doctor replied, and he loved you. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I knew that, but they also don't justify everything. After he left, I sat alone for a long time. I thought about my life, about the unease I had always carried without understanding why, about how I always checked the locks more carefully than others, always stayed alert around strangers. I had lived like someone who knew everything could be taken away at any moment. Aaron and Daniel came into the room. They both looked at me, waiting. I'm not who I thought I was, I said. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. And your father knew. Daniel stepped forward and took my hand. You're still our mom. Aaron was silent for a long time. Then he asked, Dad did all of this? For you? I nodded. And what about us? Aaron asked. Did he ever think about what this would do to our family? I had no answer. That night, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The face was still mine. The wrinkles were still there. The life I had lived was real, but my name and where my story truly began were not. I didn't know whether to feel angry, grateful, or heartbroken. I only knew that from that moment on, I could never go back to being a woman who didn't know. And if the truth had begun to surface, then I needed all of it. Not just for me, but for my family. We returned to the house 2 days later in the late afternoon. Not because I wanted to, but because they said there were a few things that needed to be confirmed on site. I agreed on the condition that both of my sons come with me and that representatives from the authorities be present. The house felt both familiar and strange. Warning tape still hung across the front door. Inside, it was so quiet I could hear my own footsteps. I had just stepped past the living room when I heard a familiar voice. Margaret? I turned around. Standing near the kitchen door was Robert Hale, a man I had known for more than 30 years, a former neighbor, the town's former police chief, the man who had brought soup to my house during the first week after my husband's funeral. I heard you were back, he said, his voice as gentle as ever, so I stopped by to see if you needed any help. Aaron stopped short. Daniel looked at me, his eyes alert. How did you get into the house? Aaron asked. Robert smiled faintly. The back door wasn't locked properly, one of Henry's old habits. The words sent a chill through me. I didn't recall ever mentioning that habit to him. We're in the middle of something, I said. This isn't a good time. Just a few minutes, he replied, stepping closer. I know you've been through a lot these past few days. It's not easy to face things like this at your age. The way he spoke always made people feel understood. I had trusted that once. You know about the room behind the wall, I said plainly. He paused, just for a brief beat, but I saw it. Henry shared many things with me, he said. Not everything, but enough for me to understand how hard he tried to keep things quiet. Aaron stepped forward. What are you talking about? Robert looked at Aaron, then Daniel, then back at me. His eyes were no longer gentle. Henry went too far, he said. He didn't understand that some things are meant to stay buried. He frightened people. He was afraid for me, I replied. Robert exhaled, and because of that, he made everyone else afraid. I understood before he continued. You know who I am, I said softly. He nodded. I've known for a very long time. Daniel tightened his grip on my hand. Aaron stepped back slightly as if assessing the situation. We have witnesses, Aaron said. We have files. We have evidence. Robert smiled. I know, and I also know how many families those files could destroy, how many lives. He looked directly at me. Is that what you want, Margaret, at this stage of your life? You killed my husband, I said. The words landed lightly in the air, but they were enough to slow him. Henry was an unfortunate accident, Robert replied. He refused to stop, and I couldn't let him continue. You call that an accident? Aaron snapped. Robert looked at Aaron, his gaze turning cold. I call it a choice. No one spoke for several seconds. I could clearly feel that the danger was no longer abstract. Robert stepped closer to me. Margaret, I left you alone for decades. You had a family. You had a life. Don't let it all be destroyed by questions that no longer need answers. He raised his hand, as if to place it on my shoulder. I stepped back. In that moment, I was no longer the woman who only listened and accepted. You underestimate me, I said, and you underestimate my sons. Robert chuckled softly. You still think you have a choice? I didn't answer. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket where I'd kept a small object ever since leaving the safe house. Something Henry had once placed in my hand and said, just keep it, in case you ever need it. By the time Robert realized I was no longer listening to him, it was too late. Daniel shouted. Aaron lunged forward. Everything happened quickly, but I remember every second. Robert stumbled back, losing his balance. The people outside rushed in. As he was restrained, he looked at me, his eyes filled with both anger and surprise. I didn't think you would do that, he said. I've lived long enough to learn how to protect my family, I replied. You forgot that. As they took him away, I sat down in a chair. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I didn't feel victorious. I only felt that something had ended, and something else had just begun. Robert Hale was taken away that same evening. The house became strangely quiet after everyone left. I sat in the living room, my hands resting on my knees, staring at the empty space where he had stood. Aaron and Daniel sat on either side of me. No one spoke. The truth had come out, but it didn't bring the relief I had imagined. A day later, I was invited to meet formally with the investigators. They brought sealed boxes of documents. Everything my husband had left behind now lay before me as evidence. You have a choice, one of them said calmly. We will handle the files related to serious crimes. But the rest, that's a moral issue, not just a legal one. I understood what he meant. Not all the files in that room documented crimes. Some recorded personal failings, affairs, minor financial deceit, shameful acts, but not ones that directly harmed others. If everything were made public, many families would fall apart. Children would lose faith in their parents. Older adults would spend the rest of their lives in disgrace. I asked for time. That evening, I sat with my sons in the kitchen. No television, no phones, just the three of us. Dad was wrong, Aaron said first. That doesn't change. I know, I replied. But if you hide the rest, he continued, you'll become the one who keeps controlling those secrets. Daniel looked at his brother, then at me. You don't have to carry that burden anymore, Mom. I stayed silent for a long time. I thought about Henry. About the years he lived, he was constantly on guard, controlling everything to create a sense of safety that ultimately collapsed. I didn't want to live the rest of my life that way. The next morning, I made my decision. I handed over every file related to real crimes, murder, threats, extortion, obstruction of justice. No hesitation, nothing held back. As for the rest, I asked to handle them myself. Under their supervision, I took the remaining files home. No one stopped me. Perhaps they understood that not every truth needs to be exposed. That afternoon, I lit the fireplace. Daniel and Aaron sat with me. One by one, the files were placed into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. No one spoke. As the flames died down, I felt a sense of relief. Not because I had erased other people's pasts, but because I refused to become someone who held power over their fear. Henry chose control to protect. I chose release to heal. A week later, the renovation resumed. The secret room was dismantled completely. The false wall disappeared. There were no hidden spaces left in this house. In its place, we built exactly what had been planned from the beginning: a small library, bright wooden shelves, 2 armchairs by the window, afternoon light pouring in, no hidden locks, no secret compartments. When the grandchildren came to visit, I watched them run through the house, laughing and pulling books down to put them back in the wrong places. Aaron corrected his child and Daniel laughed, saying, "Let them be free." I sat in the new chair, watching and thought about everything that had nearly destroyed my family. That evening, when I was alone in the library, I placed my hand on the wall that had once hidden an entire other world. Now it was just a wall, ordinary, real. I understood something very clearly. A family is not protected by control. A family is protected by trust. I no longer blame Henry. He did what he believed was right, guided by his knowledge and fear. But I don't continue down that path. I've lived long enough to understand that respecting others, especially those we love, means giving them the right to face the truth, even when that truth is imperfect. That night, I locked the door as usual, but I didn't check it a second time. Everything settled more quickly than I expected. Not because it was insignificant, but because people can only carry so much weight inside them. After that, they have no choice but to keep living. 3 weeks later, the house returned to its old rhythm. Morning sunlight streamed into the living room. In the afternoons, cars passed along the street out front. Small things I once overlooked now stood out with surprising clarity. Daniel moved in with me for a while. He said it was to keep an eye on Mom, but I knew he needed the company just as much. Aaron stopped by more often than before, not out of worry, but because he had begun to understand that some things can't be solved by logic alone. The library was completed in early November. On the first day I stepped inside, I stood there for a long time, the scent of fresh wood, the smell of books, and the afternoon light falling exactly where the old wall used to be. No one in the house mentioned the room that had once existed there. It wasn't necessary anymore. That weekend, the grandchildren came to visit. The older one sat cross-legged on the floor reading comic books. The younger one climbed onto a chair and asked me endless innocent questions. I listened to their laughter and realized it had been a long time since a sound had felt that light. "Grandma," the little one asked, "why do you keep looking at that shelf?" I smiled. "Because I like thinking about the books that will go there." They nodded and ran off. No further explanation was needed. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the library. I picked up one of Henry's old books, the one he had been reading before he passed. I didn't open it. I simply put it back where it belonged. My life has 2 stories. One story I was told, and one story I lived. Both are real. Both belong to me. I no longer see myself as a victim of the past, nor do I see myself as responsible for what my husband did. I am simply a woman who has lived long enough to understand that no one can protect a family by keeping everything in the dark. A family doesn't need to be perfect. A family needs to be respected. I often think about that, especially when I look at my 2 sons. They're grown, with lives of their own, but when things happened, they came back. Not out of obligation, but because this is where they belong. I also think about age. At 63, people tend to think you grow weaker. The truth is, you simply speak less, you argue less, and you become more selective about where you spend your energy. I chose my family, not by hiding more secrets, but by ending them. Before going to bed, I took out my phone. The unknown number that had once sent me threats was still on my list. I looked at it for a moment, then deleted it. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed to carry it. My life is no longer guided by what remains unsaid. If you're listening to this story and have lived long enough to understand that sometimes we face the truth later than we wish, I want to say just one thing. It's never too late to choose how you live. It's never too late to protect your family with honesty and respect. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe that the experiences of those who have already lived nearly half a lifetime still hold value, then stay with us. Because the most essential stories, they are often not told by the loudest voices,